Hey guys, welcome back. Got something a little bit different this go around. When I was a kid and I first started reading and collecting comics, I was more or less a DC guy. I kind of discovered Marvel a little bit later. But being a DC fan, normally I gravitated toward the Superman stuff. So, one of my favorite books that I started reading was Superboy and Superboy and the Legion. And uh, to me, the late '60s, early '70s was a great time to start reading and collecting comics because a lot of times you would have these giant-sized books, the DC 100 pagers, the 80-page giants, all the big annuals from Marvel, and so on and so forth. But the thing is, you would get a new story, or at least a new story to that year, and you would get some reprints like from early Silver Age or some Golden Age stuff. So you kind of got to see pretty much the whole history of that character or that company or whatever you were into at the time. Um, but to me, Superboy was always one of my favorites when I started out. Flash, Justice League, like a lot of the old Marvel monster reprints. But something that kind of bugged me. Uh, I know when I would read an old reprint of Superman or Superboy, you would see his foster parents, Ma and Pa Kent, and they'd be like this kindly, elderly, white-haired little couple, right? And then you would read some of the new Superboy stories, and they would be like you see on the cover here. They would be like younger, maybe early 40ish, and I didn't make a big deal of it at the time, but I always kind of wondered, and later on it kind of bugged me. So, like I say, you can see there, they're like I say, they're pretty young looking, and anybody that read Superman and Superboy in the Silver Age, uh, knew that they were like a already like maybe in their 60s or 70s and kind of white haired. And I was kind of wondering how all that worked out. And I'd kind of read a couple stories that had some reference to what happened to them and all that. And I'm sure somebody else has already figured this out or maybe done a video, but this is just my take on it. Uh, so I did some research and I went through my collection and actually had all the books that I kind of needed to tell this tale. Okay, the first mention of Ma and Pa Kent, dying and kind of showing what happened before Superman left Smallville and went to Metropolis, was a story from Superman 161 here, called The Last Days of Ma and Pa Kent. And I'm just going to try to maybe skim through some of these stories and kind of hit the high points. Uh, I think the art in some of these Superman stories, other than Kurt Swan, was probably like Al Plastino or somebody, for those of you that are interested. But you kind of have the splash page there showing them on their deathbed. But it shows Superman as an adult over here, and he says, "Well, there's an anniversary because you see the calendar." And he goes to the grave sites and he starts thinking back to when he was when he was Superboy. Well, actually, he had built a pleasure cruiser for a Caribbean holiday for his mom and dad. Well, they start digging around in the sand and they find an old treasure chest. It's got like an old pistol and a cutlass and a piece of parchment. And there's like a part of a letter said, "On this day, by some guy named Pegleg Morgan, I was driven off the ship by the cruelest pirate of them all. He marooned me on this island because," and then it kind of cuts off. So, Ma, she's kind of curious. And, they kind of ask him, "Well, so before we go back to Smallville, could you do us a favor, so take us back in time, just like it's no big thing." And what's kind of funny to me, my PTA club will be just thrilled to hear the story. It's like, okay, how's she going to tell that story at the PTA? Like I say, I will admit the stuff from the '60s from DC was a little bit simple-minded as far as the writing went. It was kind of silly. Marvel kind of had it over DC as far as the writing and the scripts. But this is kind of what I started out with, and sometimes I like a little bit of silly. So, but anyway, he constructs like a big bubble to put the pleasure cruiser that he built his mom and dad to take him back in time to see just what happened with these pirates. So they go back and they find where the guy was marooned on the island, and so they decide they're going to have a little bit of fun, with the pirates, and uh, you know he lets them think that he's weak, and he's going to like let himself be drowned in the sea and all that kind of stuff. Okay, and they have a little adventure, and he takes them forward in time again. Well, when they get back, they get sick, and he found out from these doctors it's something called the fever plague, and said nobody's had the fever plague in like 100 years, and would have to have traveled back in time. Who would have known? And then Superboy knows, well, I'm to blame. Since I took them back in time, they contracted the fever plague. Well, he looks for all these cures and everything, and all these serums and stuff. Well, of course, you have a little subplot going on where they parole Luther for a little while. Well, I've got something that will help heal him and restore him, and if your father's on a parole board, and he'll get me out of prison, blah, blah, blah. Well, he tries it on him. It doesn't work. He goes back to prison. Well, he wouldn't help me anyway. And then he's thinking, okay, well, maybe I can project him into the Phantom Zone, because in the Phantom Zone, they would be like ghosts. They wouldn't age and they wouldn't be sick, and he could find a cure. Well, he goes to the bottom of the ocean, and he's got the Phantom Zone projector in some kind of case down here at the bottom of the ocean. And he's trying to project him into the Phantom Zone, but hey, guess what happens? Solar flares from the sun. They've created a magnetic storm, and that always affects the Phantom Zone ray. Well, what can I do now? Well, there's nothing he can do. So his mom passes away, Dad's on a deathbed, and then it kind of shows him up in here. Well, so I always remember you, and he's kind of going over the house with his heat ray vision to like kill all the plague germs and all this. And he's like racked by guilt because he thinks because he took them back in time and they contracted the fever plague that it was his fault. Well, he finds part of the parchment that they had found, and he finds out that the rest of that diary is in a museum. And here, the reason that he was stranded on an island because he already had the fever plague, and they thought that they had contracted it from eating the fruit for some reason. So it really wasn't his fault. He finds out. So a sad day, but he's kind of absolved himself from the guilt of thinking he caused his parents' death, and so he goes out in space and he makes a stone memorial next to the ones for Jor-El and Lara, and he'll never forget them. And so that was the last days of Mom and Pa Kent. Well, this was in '63. A couple years later, in Superboy 145, you see parents live with fantastic faces, and their change is permanent. You must change us back to normal. Well, in this issue, like I say, this is a couple years later. Faces of Mom and Pa Kent take a good look, and you'll never see them again. Well, as I say, a lot of this stuff in the '60s was kind of silly. There was actually a guy on another planet who had like stolen images or like filmed images of Superboy doing his feats, and he had like started his own TV show on another planet. Saying, well, said this is going good, but and they think it's a big TV studio and he's filming all this stuff, and he's actually just got a big telescope just filming Superboy's exploits. So okay, this showing how he does it all and how he's got his camera that goes interplanetary and films Superboy and all this. Well, he finds out that the people that are watching the show are, some of them are complaining like, well, he's got like an old mom and dad, and the young kids can't relate. So they've got a means to punish criminals. What they do, instead of putting them in a death chair, they give them a youth serum, and it makes them revert to a baby. And then they, supposedly live out their life crime-free. So he obtained some of the youth serum, and he actually makes it materialize inside of a well that's in Smallville. So it's like a youth serum, and and Superboy picks up some kind of gem on the asteroid belt, and they're drinking lemonade from the well. Well, they think that the jewel makes them turn young, so this is the first time you see him turning younger. And of course they think, well, hey, it was just from this jewel, and so, well, how are we going to explain this? So we'll have to leave Smallville, and how we explain turning younger. And so they concoct this big scheme where want to turn a bunch of people that are older into Smallville into younger people and make it think it was like a something happening to a big group of people. And by this time they've already, made like masks to conceal that they've turned themselves younger. So they invite all these older people to a cookout or a party. And Superboy all this time is thinking it's come from this gym. And of course the guy back on the other planet is filming them, and as the old couple turn younger, and so his TV show won't go off the air. And like I say, this is all kind of silly. But the thing of it is, they bring the old people in, and Superboy rigs up a stunt where it makes it look like a comet flew over where they were at, and it turned all these people younger. But actually, they were drinking the lemonade that came from the well. And I think by this time, Superboy had figured it out. Of course, you got a crook that's trying to, an old crook that's trying to get back into doing what he did. But, of course, this guy's schemes are ruined because they want to do a show about Superman, and they want old parents. He don't know how to do that well. You see at the end of this one, it says, a final message from us readers: the youth serum's effect is permanent, and I wouldn't change Mom and Dad Kent back if I could. So now we'll stay young, and who's complaining? Okay, so that explains that. So, all the time that I was reading the Superboy stuff and they were young, I really didn't know what was going on. Well, about 5 years later, in this giant-size Superboy, they reprint the tragic day that Ma and Pa Kent died. Now, they retitled the story, and to make it fit what was going on in current continuity, they had redrawn their faces in this story. So instead of being like an old couple, now they were like young again, just like what you would see as what was going on in the current storylines. So there's a young Ma and Pa Kent. Like I say, they redrew all the faces. Like I say, this is a reprint from a few years before, but they, they redid all the faces. And at the end of the story, you see them on their deathbeds again, and they're still young. Okay. Now, like I say, this, I really didn't care about it that much when I was a kid and I was reading it. But I was always kind of curious, okay, how were they old and how were they young? And, did they die old? Did they die young? Well, as far as I know, the last that was ever said about this was in Action Comics 500. And this came out like 9 years later after that last Superboy story. Now, got to keep in mind, this was probably 6 years before Crisis on Infinite Earths, pre-Crisis, pre-Infinite Crisis, pre-Final Crisis, pre-Flashpoint, and especially pre-New 52. So you kind of have to know, what timeline or what reality you're dealing with here. Now in this issue, which was a pretty good issue, by the way, it's all drawn by Curt Swan and kind of showed covers from the anniversary issues, issue 100, 200, 300, and 400, and like some more issues. But really, this is a story where Superman goes back through and tells his life story. Okay, and I was really kind of interested in this. And when you first see Ma and Pa Kent in this story, find them, they're probably like 40-ish here. Doesn't have white hair yet. But they find them and they find out, well, we've got a kid from another planet. Everybody knows the story. Okay, and all this time, there's stuff that he's like taking people through a museum, and the whole plot to this is Luthor is behind the whole deal, and he's somehow got skin cells from Superman, and he's able to, like grow a clone and put those memories inside the clone as Superman's telling his story. Which really doesn't have anything to do with what I'm talking about, but just so you know what this story is about. Okay, and he's got Lana Lang and Lois Lane there, and there's stuff there he can't tell. There's a chapter of his life that's closed. Okay, and here's the way they explain this. So while in their late 50s, they'd undergone an amazing transformation, and they drank from a well that had been polluted with an alien rejuvenation serum. Well, according to this story, it showed them like right after his high school graduation, they were getting older again, and the serum's wearing off. So when they died, you saw them there as old again, which kind of contradicts everything I've just shown you. So, and as far as I know, that was the final word on that, because, like I say, this was the pre-crisis Superman, and everything changed after that. But that was something I was just kind of curious about, and anybody that was a Superman or Superboy fan that ever wondered about that and didn't know, like I say, mine's not the final word on it. I'm sure people have probably went through and researched this, but it was just kind of a fun thing for me to do, and for anybody that's interested in Superman and Superboy and the mystery of Ma and Pa Kent, there you go. So I'm past 16 minutes. I'm going to cut it off right there. For those of you that stuck around, glad you could watch it and share this with me. And as always, onward and upward.